It's important to remember the lessons of the past to build a better future.
My name is Dorothy Harlan, and I'm 74 years old. For most of my life, I've been what people call comfortable. Not flashy, not boastful, just quietly secure. My late husband Gerald built a successful commercial real estate business over 40 years, and when he passed 6 years ago, he left me with more money than I knew what to do with. Among those assets was our villa in Carmel by the Sea, a stunning $5 million property overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Gerald and I had dreamed of retiring there together, but cancer took him before we got the chance. Now that villa sits mostly empty, a monument to dreams we never quite fulfilled. I visit it twice a year, walking the beach and remembering better days. I live now in a modest but lovely home in Sacramento, close to my son Brandon and his family. Or at least I thought I was close to them. Brandon is my only child, the center of my universe for 51 years. I changed his diapers, packed his lunches, cheered at his soccer games, and cried with pride when he graduated from UC Davis. He married Sienna 4 years ago, and I'll be honest, from the beginning, something felt off. She was polite enough in public, always smiling for family photos, but there was a coldness in her eyes when she looked at me, a calculation. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just adjusting to sharing my son with another woman. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I was in my garden, deadheading roses and enjoying the last warm days before autumn truly set in. My hands were covered in soil when my cell phone rang. Brandon's name flashed on the screen, and my heart lifted the way it always does when I hear from him. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. "Sienna and I need to talk to you about something." My stomach tightened immediately. Those words, "we need to talk," are never followed by good news. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and sat down on the porch steps, bracing myself. "We've decided to have an intimate wedding ceremony," Brandon continued, his words coming out in a rehearsed rush. "Just immediate family. Sienna's parents, her sister, and us. We want to keep it really small and meaningful." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. "Wait, what do you mean, immediate family? Brandon, I'm your mother. Am I not immediate family?" There was a terrible pause, the kind of silence that speaks volumes. "Sienna feels like the ceremony should just be for people she's closest to," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said, "Her parents and sister, and obviously us. She thinks having you there would make it feel less intimate." I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't draw air into my lungs for several seconds. My son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was telling me I wasn't invited to his wedding because his fiancé didn't consider me close enough? "Brandon, are you hearing yourself right now?" I asked, my voice shaking with hurt and disbelief. "You're telling me your own mother isn't immediate family? That I'm not close enough to witness my only child get married?" He cleared his throat, clearly miserable, but not backing down. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it is. Sienna has very specific ideas about how she wants this day to go, and I'm trying to respect her wishes. It's her wedding too." Her wedding too. Those 3 words told me everything I needed to know about who was really making these decisions. My sweet, thoughtful Brandon had been transformed into someone I barely recognized. A man who would exclude his own mother to please a woman who apparently felt threatened by the very person who gave him life. "Fine," I said, my voice cold and flat. "If that's what you both want, I won't be there. I hope it's everything she's dreamed of." I hung up before he could respond, before I could say something I might regret. I sat there on my porch steps as the afternoon sun slanted across my garden, and I wept like I hadn't wept since Gerald's funeral. The next 3 days were torture. I didn't sleep, barely ate, and spent most of my time staring at old photo albums of Brandon as a child. His first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and grinning. His high school graduation, so proud in his cap and gown. His college acceptance letter, both of us crying happy tears. Had I done something wrong? Had I been too much of a presence in his adult life? I replayed every interaction with Sienna in my mind, searching for the moment I'd offended her, the mistake I'd made that would lead to this rejection. But I couldn't find it. I'd been nothing but welcoming, nothing but kind. The phone call came on Friday evening. Brandon's name appeared, and for a moment I considered not answering. But maternal instinct is powerful. I can't ignore my child, even when he's hurt me. "Mom," he said, and this time his voice was different, lighter, almost cheerful. Sienna had the most amazing idea. My hands gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles going white. "She was thinking about the reception, and she remembered your villa in Carmel. It would be absolutely perfect for what we're envisioning. Intimate, beautiful, with those ocean views. Would you be willing to let us use it for the wedding weekend?" I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly, measuring each word. "I'm not good enough to attend the ceremony, not close enough to be considered immediate family, but my $5 million property is perfectly acceptable for your celebration?" Brandon had the audacity to sound confused. "Mom, come on, that's not fair. The ceremony is one thing, but the reception is different. We'd be so grateful if you'd let us use the villa. Sienna's already been looking at caterers in the area and everything." "She's been looking at caterers," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "So she's been planning to use my property without even asking me first? She's been assuming I'd just hand over the keys to a house worth more than most people make in a lifetime after excluding me from the most important day of your life?" Brandon sighed, that exasperated sound that children make when they think their parents are being unreasonable. "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a house. You barely use it anyway. What difference does it make if we have our reception there?" If you're already feeling the heartbreak Dorothy is experiencing, wait until you hear what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single moment of this shocking family drama. Just a house. Those words were the final straw. That villa represented 50 years of Gerald's hard work, our shared dreams, our legacy. It was the place where we were supposed to grow old together, watching sunsets and hosting our grandchildren for summer vacations. It wasn't just a house, it was a piece of my heart, a tangible connection to the man I'd loved for 46 years. And now my son and his calculating fiancé wanted to use it as a backdrop for their Instagram perfect wedding. Well, I sat at home, excluded and dismissed. "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not. You're not using the villa." Brandon's tone shifted immediately, becoming harder, more hostile. "Mom, be reasonable. It's not like you're doing anything with it, and Sienna's already sent save the dates mentioning Carmel." My jaw dropped. She mentioned my property on invitations before asking my permission. "Brandon, what has happened to you? When did you become someone who would treat your own mother this way?" His response was cold, clinical. "I'm trying to build a life with my wife, Mom. Sienna's my future. I need you to accept that and support us. Letting us use the villa would be a way to show that you're happy for us, even if you can't be at the ceremony." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, but something else. My spine stiffening, my resolve hardening. I'd spent 74 years being accommodating, being understanding, putting other people's needs before my own. Gerald had been the same way, generous to a fault, always thinking of others. But there's a difference between generosity and being a doormat, and I suddenly realized I'd crossed that line. "Brandon, Michael, Harlan," I said, using his full name like I hadn't since he was a teenager caught sneaking out. "You listen to me very carefully. You are not using my villa. You are not setting foot on that property. And if Sienna has already told people it's happening there, she can explain to them why the venue changed. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then Brandon said something I never thought I'd hear from my son. "You're gonna regret this, Mom. Sienna's family has connections, important people. You're making a big mistake." It was a threat, barely veiled, and it came from the boy I'd raised to be kind and respectful. I realized then that I'd already lost my son, not to marriage, but to a woman who'd systematically turned him against me. "The only mistake I made," I replied quietly, "was not seeing this coming sooner. Goodbye, Brandon." I hung up, turned off my phone, and poured myself a glass of Gerald's best scotch, the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion. The morning after I refused Brandon and Sienna access to my villa, I woke up with a splitting headache and a heart that felt like it had been run through a meat grinder. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. Part of me wondered if I'd been too harsh, too quick to say no. But then I remembered Brandon's words, "You're going to regret this," and my resolve strengthened. That wasn't my son speaking. That was a man who'd been poisoned against his own mother, and I needed to accept that painful reality. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table staring out at the garden Gerald and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were still blooming, defiant against the approaching fall. I felt a kinship with them in that moment. Still standing, still beautiful, despite the cold winds starting to blow. My phone sat on the table, still powered off from the night before. I knew the moment I turned it on, there would be messages. Angry ones, probably. Maybe some from Brandon. Definitely some from Sienna. I wasn't ready to face that yet. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old address book. Yes, an actual physical book with handwritten entries, and looked up the number for Margaret Cordova, my attorney. Margaret and I had been friends since our kids were in elementary school together. She'd handled Gerald's estate when he passed, and she'd always told me to call if I ever needed anything. Well, I needed something now. I needed to protect myself and my assets from people who apparently saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I turned on my phone just long enough to call her office. "Dorothy!" Margaret's warm voice came through the line like a lifeline. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" I felt tears prick my eyes at the genuine concern in her voice. "Not great, Margaret. I need your help with something delicate. It involves Brandon and his fiancée." I heard the rustle of papers as she cleared her schedule. "Come to my office this afternoon, 2 o'clock. And Dorothy, whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together." I thanked her and hung up, then immediately powered my phone back off. I wasn't ready for the onslaught yet. First, I needed a plan. At exactly 2 o'clock, I sat in Margaret's downtown Sacramento office, surrounded by law books and framed degrees. She poured us both tea from a delicate china pot. Margaret had always been elegant that way, and settled into the chair across from me. "Tell me everything," she said simply. So I did. I told her about the phone call, about being excluded from the wedding, about the audacious demand for my villa. I told her about Brandon's threat, about how I barely recognized my own son anymore. By the time I finished, Margaret's jaw was tight and her eyes were blazing. That manipulative little... Margaret caught herself and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Dorothy, but that woman is trying to isolate Brandon from you while simultaneously plundering your assets. I've seen this pattern before in elder abuse cases." The words hit me like ice water. Elder abuse. I was 74, yes, but I'd never thought of myself as elderly, as vulnerable. Yet here I was, being systematically put out of my son's life while being expected to hand over property worth millions.
"What can I do?" I asked, my voice small and frightened in a way I hated. Margaret pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "First, we're going to review your estate plan. I want to make sure everything is ironclad, no loopholes, no vulnerabilities. Second, we're going to document everything, every text message, every phone call, every interaction with Brandon or Sienna from this point forward. Third, we're going to send a formal letter to both of them, clearly stating that the villa is off limits and outlining the consequences if they attempt to use it without permission." She looked up at me, her expression fierce. "Dorothy, you've been generous your whole life, but there's a difference between generosity and being taken advantage of. Right now, you're being used, and we're going to put a stop to it." I left Margaret's office 3 hours later with a thick folder of documents and a slightly lighter heart. She'd reviewed my will, my trust documents, and all the property deeds. Everything was secure, but she'd made some strategic recommendations. Most importantly, she'd drafted a cease and desist letter that would be hand-delivered to Brandon and Sienna within 48 hours. It explicitly forbade them from using the villa and warned of legal consequences if they proceeded. It felt harsh, taking legal action against my own son, but Margaret had been right. I needed to protect myself. When I got home, I finally allowed myself to turn on my phone and check my messages. 53 texts, 12 voicemails. My stomach churned as I started reading through them. The first few were from Brandon, each one more desperate than the last. "Mom, please reconsider. Mom, you're ruining our wedding. Mom, Sienna crying because of you." That last one made me actually laugh out loud. Sienna, who'd coldly excluded me from the ceremony, was supposedly devastated that I wouldn't let her use my property. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. But it was the text from Sienna herself that truly shocked me. The first one was saccharine sweet. "Dorothy, I hope we can work through this misunderstanding. The villa would mean so much to us." But as I scrolled down, they became progressively more hostile. "You're being selfish and petty. Brandon deserves better than a bitter old woman for a mother. We're using that villa with or without your permission." That last text made my blood cold. It wasn't a request or even a demand anymore. It was a declaration of intent. They were planning to use my property regardless of my wishes.
You won't believe what Sienna tries next. Hit that like button if you think Dorothy is doing the right thing by standing her ground, and keep watching to see how this family war escalates. I immediately forwarded all the text to Margaret, then sat down to compose my response. My hands shook as I typed, but my words were steady and clear. "Brandon and Sienna, I have retained legal counsel regarding this matter. You are formally forbidden from accessing my property in Carmel. Any attempt to do so will result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to criminal trespassing charges. My attorney will be sending you official documentation of this decision. Do not contact me again about this matter." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response was instant. My phone started ringing, Brandon's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. After the fifth call, I listened to the voicemail he'd left. His voice was shaking with rage, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "How dare you threaten us with legal action, Mom? We're your family. We're trying to start our lives together, and you're acting like we're criminals. Sienna is hysterical. Her parents are appalled by your behavior. You're going to be cut out of our lives completely if you keep this up." Cut out of their lives? As if I wasn't already being excluded, already pushed aside. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. I saved the voicemail, documentation as Margaret had instructed, and blocked both Brandon's and Sienna's numbers. I couldn't handle the constant barrage of manipulation and guilt-tripping. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out how my relationship with my only child had deteriorated so completely and so quickly. That night, I barely touched my dinner. I sat in Gerald's recliner, the one I'd never been able to get rid of, and I talked to him like he was still there. "Gerald," I whispered into the empty room, "what would you do? How would you handle this?" I could almost hear his response, that gentle wisdom he'd always possessed. He'd tell me to stand my ground, to protect what we'd built together, but also to leave the door open for Brandon to come to his senses. Gerald had always believed that people could change, that love could overcome manipulation. I wanted to believe that too, but right now it felt like hoping for a miracle. I fell asleep in that chair, dreaming of better days when Brandon was young and the future felt bright with possibility. The next morning, I was awakened by violent pounding on my front door. I jolted upright, my neck stiff from sleeping in the chair, and stumbled toward the sound. Through the peephole, I could see Brandon's face, red and contorted with anger. Behind him stood Sienna, her arms crossed and her expression smug. My heart raced as I realized they'd come to confront me in person. I kept the chain lock engaged and opened the door just a crack. "What do you want, Brandon?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We want to talk," he said, but his tone suggested it would be less talking and more demanding. "Face to face, like adults. Let us in, Mom." I shook my head slowly. "Anything you need to say can be said through my attorney. You'll be receiving her letter today." Sienna stepped forward then, her face twisted with contempt. "Listen to me, you selfish old hag. That villa is wasted on you. You're sitting on millions of dollars while your son tries to build a future. We need that property and we're going to get it, one way or another." The threat was clear, and it was chilling. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd loved unconditionally for 51 years. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who would stand by while his wife verbally abused his mother. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Both of you. Now." Brandon opened his mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. They turned and walked away, Sienna's heels clicking sharply on my front walkway. I closed the door, locked it, and slid down to sit on the floor, my whole body trembling. That afternoon, Margaret called to confirm that the cease and desist letter had been delivered. "Dorothy, I want you to consider installing security cameras at both your home and the villa. Based on those texts and what you've told me about this morning's confrontation, I'm genuinely concerned about what they might do next." I agreed immediately. The woman who threatened me on my own doorstep was clearly capable of anything, and my son, God help him, was too far under his spell to stop her. I spent the rest of the day making arrangements with a security company, trying to fortify my life against people who should have been my greatest source of joy and comfort. Within 48 hours of Margaret's recommendation, my home looked like something out of a spy movie. A security company had installed cameras at every entrance, motion sensors in the yard, and a state-of-the-art alarm system that connected directly to my phone and the local police department. The technician, a kind young man named Marcus, had been incredibly patient as I fumbled through learning how to use the app. "Mrs. Harlan," he said gently, "I hope you never need any of this, but if you do, you'll have evidence of everything." Evidence. Such a clinical word for documenting my own son's potential betrayal. The villa in Carmel required more extensive measures. I couldn't be there to monitor it personally, so Margaret had arranged for a property management company to install similar security equipment and conduct daily drive-by checks. She'd also hired a local attorney in Carmel to handle any issues that might arise. The costs were adding up, thousands of dollars to protect myself from my own family. But Margaret had been insistent. "Dorothy, you're not overreacting. You're being prudent. Women your age are particularly vulnerable to financial exploitation, especially from family members." The statistics she had shared were horrifying. I never thought I'd become one of them. 3 days after the confrontation on my doorstep, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Harlan?" The voice was female, professionally cool. "This is Vanessa Chen from Elegant Celebrations, a wedding planning company in the Bay Area. I'm calling regarding the Harlan Morrison wedding scheduled for October 15th at your Carmel property." My blood turned to ice. They'd actually gone ahead and booked vendors for my villa, even after everything, even after the cease and desist letter. The audacity was breathtaking. I took a deep breath and made a decision. "Miss Chen, I'm going to give you my attorney's contact information. She'll provide you with documentation proving that this event cannot and will not take place at my property. I suggest you speak with her immediately and then address this matter with your clients. They've misrepresented their access to the venue." After I gave her Margaret's information and hung up, I sat in stunned silence. They hadn't just hoped I'd change my mind, they'd proceeded as if my explicit refusal didn't matter. They'd hired vendors, paid deposits, and told everyone the wedding would be at my villa. The level of entitlement was staggering. Margaret called me back within an hour. Dorothy, the wedding planner contacted me. This is actually good news for us. It establishes clear evidence of their intent to trespass and use your property without permission. I've documented everything. She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. But there's something else. The planner mentioned that Brandon and Sienna have invited over 200 people to this reception, 200 guests expecting to attend an event at your private property. My stomach propped. This wasn't just about a small, intimate gathering anymore. They were planning a massive event, and they expected me to simply accept it. What happens now? I asked, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. Margaret's voice was firm, reassuring. Now we go on the offensive. I'm filing for a restraining order against both of them regarding the villa. We have enough evidence, the texts, the threats, the unauthorized vendor bookings. A judge will see this for what it is, an attempt to unlawfully occupy your property. We'll also send notices to any other vendors they may have hired, putting them on alert that the venue is unavailable and any services rendered there will be considered participation in trespassing. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. Margaret had warned me that Brandon and Sienna would likely be there, and I needed to prepare myself emotionally. I spent those days in a fog, barely eating, moving through my daily routines like a ghost. My neighbor, Helen, a widow I'd been friendly with for 15 years, noticed my state and came over with a casserole. "Dorothy, honey, you look terrible," she said with characteristic bluntness. "What's going on?" I broke down and told her everything. The wedding exclusion, the villa demands, the escalating threats. Helen's face grew darker with each detail. "That boy needs his head examined," she said when I finished. "And that woman, she's a gold digger, plain and simple. She saw your money and decided to squeeze you for everything she could while pushing you out of Brandon's life." It was harsh, but accurate. Helen squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing. Don't you dare back down now. Women our age, we've survived too much to let entitled brats push us around." Her fierce support meant more than she could know. I realized then how isolated I'd become, how much I'd let Brandon and Sienna's manipulation cut me off from friends and community. Dorothy is about to face her son in court, and what happens next will leave you speechless. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the explosive courtroom confrontation. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brandon as a little boy, how he'd crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, how he'd bring me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's yard because he thought they were weeds. Where had that sweet child gone? How had he transformed into a man who would legally battle his own mother over property that wasn't his? I got up at 3 in the morning and pulled out old photo albums, torturing myself with memories of happier times. Gerald smiled up at me from a dozen photographs, his arm around young Brandon at baseball games, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully, in a navy suit that Gerald had always said made me look distinguished. Margaret had stressed the importance of appearing composed and credible in court. "You need to look like the reasonable party," she'd said. "Let them be the ones who appear unstable and grasping." I applied minimal makeup with shaking hands, trying to cover the dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. At 9 a.m., Helen drove me to the courthouse. I didn't trust myself behind the wheel, my nerves were so frayed. The courthouse was an imposing building of granite and glass in downtown Sacramento. Margaret met me at the entrance, her briefcase in hand and her expression all business. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we walked through the metal detectors and down the hallway to the courtroom, I saw them. Brandon and Sienna sat on a bench with their attorney, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. Brandon's eyes met mine for just a moment, and I searched desperately for some sign of remorse, some flicker of the son I'd raised. But his gaze slid away, cold and distant. Sienna, on the other hand, stared at me with undisguised contempt. She was dressed impeccably in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, her hair and makeup perfect. She whispered something to Brandon, and he nodded stiffly. Their attorney stood and approached Margaret.
Miss Cardova, perhaps we can settle this without bothering the judge. Mrs. Harlan simply needs to be reasonable about allowing the children to use her property. Surely we can come to some arrangement. The condescension in his tone, calling them the children as if they were helpless innocents, made my jaw clench. Margaret's smile was sharp as a knife. Mr. Patterson, my client has been more than clear. There will be no arrangement. We're here to obtain a restraining order to protect Mrs. Harlan's property rights and personal safety. If your clients had been reasonable, we wouldn't be in this courtroom. Mr. Patterson's expression soured. Personal safety? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? We're talking about a mother and son disagreement, not a violent crime. Margaret pulled out her phone and began scrolling through the screenshots I'd provided. The text messages, voicemails, contracts with vendors, photographs of Brandon and Sienna at my front door captured by my newly installed security cameras. The judge took her time reviewing each piece, her expression growing more severe with each page. Finally, she looked up at Mr. Patterson. "Counselor, would your clients like to explain why they believed they had permission to use Mrs. Harlan's property after being explicitly denied?" Mr. Patterson stood, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, this is a family matter that's been blown out of proportion. My clients simply hoped—" "Hoped," Judge Brennan interrupted, her voice sharp. "Mr. Patterson, your clients didn't just hope. They signed contracts, paid deposits, and, according to these text messages, explicitly stated they would use the property with or without permission. That's not hoping. That's planning to trespass." She turned her attention to Brandon and Sienna. "Would either of you like to address the court?" Sienna stood immediately, her voice taking on a saccharine quality that made my skin crawl. "Your Honor, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Dorothy, Mrs. Harlan, is Brandon's mother. We naturally assumed she'd want to help us celebrate our wedding." Judge Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Harlan explicitly denied you permission, multiple times, according to this evidence. On what grounds did you assume her answer would change?" Sienna's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of irritation crossing her features. "Well, Your Honor, she barely uses that property. It sits empty most of the year. It seemed wasteful for her to refuse us when we could put it to such beautiful use. And frankly, she's not even invited to the ceremony, so allowing us the reception venue seemed like the least she could do." The courtroom went silent. Even Mr. Patterson looked horrified at what Sienna had just admitted. Judge Brennan removed her glasses slowly, fixing Sienna with a stare that could have frozen fire. "Let me make sure I understand correctly, Miss Morrison. You excluded Mrs. Harlan from your wedding ceremony, but you expected her to provide you with access to her multi-million-dollar property for your reception? And when she declined, you proceeded anyway, making arrangements as if her refusal didn't matter?" Sienna seemed to realize she'd made a mistake, but it was too late. We just thought she'd come around, Your Honor." Judge Brennan looked at Brandon, who'd remained silent throughout. "Mr. Harlan, this is your mother we're discussing. Do you have anything to say?" Brandon stood slowly, and for a moment I hoped, desperately, foolishly hoped, that he'd apologize, that he'd see reason. Instead, he said, "Your Honor, my mother has more money than she knows what to do with. She's alone, no husband, no real purpose. Helping us with our wedding could have given her life meaning. Instead, she's chosen to be petty and vindictive." The words hit me like physical blows. No real purpose? Petty and vindictive? From my own son? Judge Brennan's expression transformed from stern to genuinely angry, a controlled fury that radiated from the bench like heat from a furnace. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, and when she spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. "Mr. Harlan, I am deeply disturbed by what I'm hearing from you. In my 30 years on the bench, I have heard many things, but rarely have I witnessed such breathtaking entitlement and disrespect." She paused, letting her words sink in.
Your mother's life has no purpose because she won't surrender her property to you? Let me tell you what I see here. I see a 74-year-old widow who worked alongside her husband to build a life, who raised you as a single parent after his death, and who now finds herself being emotionally blackmailed by her own child. Brandon's face flushed red, but Judge Brennan wasn't finished. You've excluded her from your wedding ceremony because she's apparently not immediate family. Yet you believe you're entitled to property she and her late husband spent decades acquiring. You've made threats, proceeded with unauthorized plans, and just now, in my courtroom, you've suggested your mother's life lacks meaning because she won't capitulate to your demands. She picked up the restraining order petition. Ms. Morrison, Mr. Harlan, I'm granting this restraining order in its entirety. You are forbidden from accessing, contacting any vendors regarding, or coming within 500 feet of the property located at the Carmel address. Violation will result in immediate arrest for criminal trespassing. Sienna shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely. Your Honor, you can't do this. We have 200 guests expecting. Judge Brennan's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Ms. Morrison, what you have is a venue problem of your own making. May I suggest you find a location where you actually have permission to be? She turned to Margaret. Miss Cordova, I'm also granting a personal restraining order. The respondents are to have no contact with Mrs. Harlan, no calls, texts, emails, or in-person visits for a period of 1 year, except through legal counsel. Any violation will be treated as contempt of court. I sat frozen in my chair, barely able to process what was happening. A year. I wouldn't hear from my son for a year. Judge Brennan wasn't done, though. Furthermore, I'm ordering both respondents to attend mediation regarding elder respect and financial boundaries before this order can be modified. And Mr. Harlan, Ms. Morrison, let me be crystal clear. If I hear that you've attempted to access that property, if you've sent anyone else to access it on your behalf, if you've so much as driven past it, I will hold you in contempt, and you will spend time in jail. Do you understand? They both nodded. Sienna's face twisted with rage, Brandon's pale with shock. As we stood to leave, Brandon tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. I couldn't bear to see whatever was there. Regret, anger, or worse, nothing at all. Margaret guided me out of the courtroom with a firm hand on my elbow. Behind us, I could hear Sienna's raised voice as she berated their advocate. How could you let this happen? Do you know how much we've spent? This is a disaster. Her priorities were showing. Not concern for her relationship with her future husband's mother, not remorse for the pain caused, just anger about money and inconvenience. We made it to Margaret's car before my legs gave out and I collapsed into the passenger seat, shaking. Dorothy, breathe. Margaret rubbed my back as I bent forward, trying to catch my breath. You did it. You stood your ground and the court backed you up. But victory felt hollow. Yes, my property was protected. Yes, I'd established clear boundaries. But at what cost? My son, my only child, the center of my world for over 50 years, had stood in that courtroom and called my life meaningless? He'd chosen a manipulative woman over his own mother. The restraining order meant safety, but it also meant isolation. 1 year of mandatory silence. 1 year of wondering if he'd ever come to his senses, or if I'd lost him forever. Helen was waiting at my house when Margaret drove me home. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a tight hug. Oh, honey, come on, let's get you inside. Margaret followed us in, setting her briefcase on my kitchen table. Dorothy, I need you to understand something. This restraining order is ironclad, but you need to stay vigilant. I don't trust them to simply accept this decision. Keep your security system active, document everything, and call me immediately if anything seems off. She pulled out a business card.
This is a therapist who specializes in family estrangement. I think you should talk to someone." After Margaret left, Helen made tea, strong and sweet, the way my own mother used to make it when I was upset as a child. "You know what I think? I think you just saved that boy's life." I looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "That woman, Sienna, she's a parasite. She would have bled you dry, isolated Brandon from anyone who could show him the truth, and eventually destroyed him financially and emotionally. By standing up now, by forcing this confrontation, you've planted a seed. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, Brandon is going to wake up and realize what he's lost." I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me. What if he doesn't, Helen? What if this is it? What if I just lost my son forever over a house? Helen reached across the table and gripped my hand fiercely. "Then you still did the right thing, Dorothy. Letting them steamroll you wouldn't have saved your relationship. It would have just taught them that you're a doormat, that you can be used and discarded whenever convenient. At least now, you've retained your dignity. You've shown that you won't be manipulated, even by your own child. That takes courage most people don't have." That night, alone in my house with all the new security measures beeping and monitoring, I allowed myself to fully grieve. I pulled out my wedding album, the one from when Gerald and I got married 46 years ago. There was a picture of me, impossibly young at 28, radiant in my simple white dress. Gerald beside me, looking at me like I hung the moon. We'd been so full of hope, so certain that love was enough to weather any storm. If someone had told me then that one day I'd be getting a restraining order against our son, I would have called them crazy. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns, leading us down roads we never imagined traveling.
Dorothy's heartbreak is palpable, but the story is far from over. What Sienna does next will shock you to your core. Make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. I spent the next few days in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of life without really living. I watered my garden, made meals I didn't eat, watched television shows without seeing them. The therapist Margaret had recommended, Dr. Patricia Vance, had an opening and I took it, desperate for something, anything to ease the ache in my chest. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with soft lighting and the kind of furniture that invites you to sink in and unburden yourself. Dr. Vance was perhaps 60, with kind eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. "Dorothy," she said, after I'd spent 30 minutes explaining the situation, "what you're experiencing is called ambiguous loss. Your son is still alive, still in the world, but he's gone from your life. In many ways, that's harder than death because there's no closure, no finality, just endless wondering and hoping." She was right. At least when Gerald died, as painful as it was, I knew he was at peace. I knew his suffering was over and I could begin to heal. But with Brandon, I was stuck in limbo, hoping he'd come to his senses, fearing he never would, unable to move forward or back. Over the next week, I slowly began to reclaim my life. I called old friends I'd neglected, joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at the local animal shelter. Dr. Vance had encouraged me to rebuild my identity beyond Brandon's mother, to remember who Dorothy Harlan was as an individual, not just in relation to my son. It was harder than I expected. For so long, being a mother had been my primary role, my greatest achievement. Motherhood had defined me since the day Brandon was born. Learning to define myself differently felt like learning a new language at 74. The security company called 10 days after the restraining order was granted. "Mrs. Harlan, we've got some activity at your Carmel property you should be aware of." My heart sank. What kind of activity? The security manager, a woman named Rita, cleared her throat. Someone attempted to access the property at 2 o'clock this morning. They had a key, not sure how they got it, maybe made a copy at some point, but when they opened the door, the alarm triggered. They fled immediately. We have clear footage of the individual. My stomach churned. Who was it? But I already knew the answer before Rita said it. A young woman matching the description of Sienna Morrison. I called Margaret immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She arrived at my house within an hour, already on her phone with the Carmel Police Department. "Dorothy, this is good news in a legal sense," she said, although her expression was grim. "She's violated the restraining order in the most clear-cut way possible. Breaking and entering, attempted trespassing, the police are going to press charges. She'll be arrested." Arrested. The mother of my future grandchildren, if I ever met them, was going to have a criminal record because she couldn't accept being told no. The whole situation had spiraled so far beyond anything I could have imagined. The arrest happened that afternoon. The Carmel police found Sienna at a luxury hotel in Monterey, one she'd apparently booked for herself and Brandon as part of their wedding weekend that was supposed to happen in 2 days. According to Margaret's contact at the police department, Sienna had been furious, screaming about how I was a vindictive old woman trying to ruin her life. She'd been taken into custody, fingerprinted, photographed, and held pending bail. Brandon had been at the hotel too, but without evidence of his direct involvement in the break-in attempt, they couldn't charge him. Still, he was now tangled in a criminal case involving his mother and his fiancé. Helen came over that evening with a bottle of wine and a fierce smile. "I know I shouldn't say this, but that woman got exactly what she deserved. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." I couldn't help it, I laughed. It was the first time I genuinely laughed in weeks, and it felt both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because for a moment the weight lifted. Terrible because it meant I was finding humor in my son's fiancé being arrested. What had my life become that this was my reality? That night, I received an email from an unknown address. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "You've destroyed everything. Our wedding is ruined. Sienna is facing criminal charges. 200 guests have been notified that the event is canceled. I hope you're happy, Mother. I hope it was worth it to prove your point. You've won. Congratulations. But you've lost me in the process. I'll never forgive you for this." It was from Brandon, sent from what must have been a new email account. Each word was designed to wound, to make me feel guilty, to make me question everything I'd done. And God help me, it worked. For a moment, I wondered if I had taken things too far. But then I reread the email more carefully. "You've destroyed everything. Not, we made terrible choices. Not, Sienna shouldn't have broken into your property. Not, I'm sorry for how I've treated you. The blame was entirely on me, the victim of their manipulation and attempted theft." I forwarded the email to Margaret, more documentation, and then I did something that felt both liberating and heartbreaking. I wrote back, just 4 words. "I did not break in." Then I blocked the email address. Dr. Vance had been teaching me about boundaries, about not accepting blame for other people's choices. This was my practice. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. An unknown number, but this time I answered. "Mrs. Harlan?" The voice was male, older, with a slight southern accent. "This is Richard Morrison, Sienna's father. I think it's time you and I had a conversation." My first instinct was to hang up, to refuse to engage, but something in his tone, a weariness, a note of defeat, made me pause. "I'm listening," I said cautiously. Richard Morrison sighed deeply. "Mrs. Harlan, I'm calling to apologize and to tell you that my daughter won't be bothering you anymore." Richard Morrison's words hung in the air, and I found myself gripping the phone tighter, unsure whether this was another manipulation or something genuine. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "forgive me if I'm skeptical, but your daughter just attempted to break into my property and is currently facing criminal charges. Why exactly are you calling me?" There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with what sounded like genuine shame. "Because I've spent the last 12 hours in a holding area watching my daughter throw a tantrum that would embarrass a 5-year-old, and I've had to face some ugly truths about how my mother and I raised her." I sat down at my kitchen table, still unsure where this conversation was headed. I said, "I'm listening," I said cautiously. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harlan, my wife passed away 3 years ago. Cancer, just like your husband. Sienna was our only child, and after Patricia died, I'm afraid I spoiled her, gave her everything she wanted, never made her hear the word no. I thought I was helping her grieve, but I was really just creating a monster." His voice cracked slightly. "When she told me about your villa, about the wedding plans, I thought you'd agreed. I had no idea she'd been lying to me, lying to everyone."
"She told you I'd agreed to let them use the property?" I asked, my mind reeling. Richard made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "Not just that. She told me you'd offered it. Said you were thrilled to help with the wedding, that you'd practically begged to contribute. She showed me text messages. I realize now they must have been fabricated or taken out of context. She's very good at manipulation, Mrs. Harlan. I'm ashamed to say, I didn't see it until I watched her in that police station, screaming about how you'd sabotaged her perfect day, how you were just a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her happy." The words, even secondhand, still stung, but I could hear the genuine distress in Richard's voice. "When the police showed me the security footage of her breaking into your property, when they explained the restraining order, the cease and desist letters, all the things she'd done, Mrs. Harlan, I was horrified. My daughter has become someone I don't recognize, someone entitled and cruel and willing to destroy other people to get what she wants, and I helped make her that way." I could hear emotion thick in his voice now. "I posted her bail this morning, but I also did something else. I told her the wedding is off, not postponed, canceled entirely. And I've cut off her access to her trust fund until she gets serious psychological help." I was stunned into silence. This was not what I'd expected from this conversation. "Mr. Morrison," I said slowly, "I appreciate you calling, but what does this mean for Brandon? They're engaged. He's been just as involved in all of this as she has." Richard's voice hardened. "Has he, though? Mrs. Harlan, I had a long conversation with your son this morning. Once Sienna was out of the room, once she couldn't whisper in his ear or manipulate the situation, I saw something interesting. Your son is exhausted. He's confused. And unless I'm very wrong, he's been under her thumb for a long time now. She isolated him from you systematically, turned him against you bit by bit. That doesn't excuse his behavior," I said, my voice sharp. "He said terrible things to me, Mr. Morrison. In court, he said my life had no purpose. He excluded me from his wedding. He threatened me." I felt tears building but refused to let them fall. Whether Sienna manipulated him or not, those were his choices, his words. Richard was quiet for a moment. "You're absolutely right. And I'm not calling to make excuses for him. I'm calling because I think he needs help, professional help, to understand what's happened to him. And I'm calling to tell you that Sienna won't be marrying your son. I'm taking her back to Georgia with me, and she'll be in intensive therapy for the foreseeable future." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, trying to process everything. Could it be true that Brandon had been manipulated, that he wasn't entirely himself? Or was I just looking for excuses because I desperately wanted my son back? Dr. Vance had warned me about this, the tendency to rationalize abusive behavior because accepting the alternative was too painful. I needed to be clear-eyed about this, not let hope cloud my judgment. Brandon was 51 years old, not a child. He bore responsibility for his actions, regardless of Sienna's influence. Still, a tiny flame of hope flickered in my chest, unwelcome and impossible to extinguish. Margaret called an hour later with an update. "Dorothy, the prosecutor is willing to offer Sienna a deal. If she pleads guilty to attempted trespassing and agrees to stay away from California for 2 years, they'll reduce the charges and she'll likely get probation instead of jail time. Her father has apparently hired a very expensive attorney who's pushing for this resolution." I thought about Richard Morrison's call, his obvious shame and determination to get her daughter help. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think you should accept it. Putting her in jail won't undo the damage, and it'll just give Brandon another reason to resent you." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since the whole nightmare began. I drove to the cemetery where Gerald was buried. His headstone was simple, elegant, just his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved husband and father." I'd chosen those words carefully 51 years ago, never imagining that father would one day be such a complicated word. I sat on the bench beside his grave, the autumn sun warm on my face, and I talked to him. "Gerald, I don't know what to do. Our boy is lost, and I don't know how to find him. Tell me, am I doing the right thing? Or have I been too harsh, too unforgiving?"
Dorothy is at a crossroads, and what happens next will determine if this family can ever heal. Don't forget to subscribe so you can see how this emotional journey continues in part 2 of the video. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.